Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're cracking open one of the absolutely greatest cold cases of the ancient world, the rise, the brilliance, and the ultimate, highly mysterious vanishing act of the Harappan Civilization. We're going to dig into how a deeply advanced society just stops, and what that actually means for how we look at the permanence of our own modern cities today. To really grasp the sheer scale of this mystery, I want you to imagine flying over the modern landscape of Pakistan and northwestern India. Picture that terrain slowly transforming below you into an enormous, bustling, ancient city. We're talking thousands of years ago. You'd see perfectly straight streets, incredibly well-planned buildings, buzzing marketplaces, and people moving through a vibrant, highly organized urban center. And then it just goes quiet. The streets empty out. How exactly does a civilization this organized decline so dramatically? Well, that right there is the core mystery of the Indus Valley, or the Harappan Civilization. They were a true Bronze Age powerhouse, developing major urban centers centuries before classical civilizations even got off the ground. Yet, what we're left with are abandoned cities, a script we literally cannot read, and rulers whose names are completely lost to time. It's a pretty sobering reminder that even the most thriving societies aren't guaranteed to last forever. Section 1. Rise of the Harappans. Now, a massive civilization like this doesn't just pop up overnight, right? It was a sprawling epic that unfolded across distinct eras. We start off with the early Harappan period, which marks the gradual emergence of increasingly complex settlements. Then we hit their golden age, the mature Harappan period. For centuries, these incredibly organized urban centers absolutely dominated the region. It's an astounding run of success, which honestly makes their eventual plunge into a period of profound decline and transformation during the second millennium BCE all the more baffling. What's truly staggering here is the sheer scale. When we look at major sites like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, or Dholavira, we quickly realize these weren't just isolated, lonely towns. Not at all. The Indus Valley Civilization covered a vast geographic region across what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, even stretching into parts of Afghanistan. They formed a massive, interconnected cultural grid that rivaled practically anything else on Earth at the time. Section 2. Master Builders and Engineers. If we take a closer look at Mohenjo-daro, we find a city of meticulously planned public architecture. We're talking incredibly precise, standardized bricks, beautiful courtyards, and of course, the famous Great Bath, which is essentially the ancient world's most impressive public pool. But here is the really fascinating part. While the architecture is completely deliberate and purposeful, archaeologists are still kind of guessing at the daily use of many of these structures. The physical evidence is undeniable, yet the actual daily human routine remains firmly locked in the past. And this brilliantly illustrates their technological prowess. Just think about the sheer coordination required here. Imagine trying to enforce a single, standardized system of weights and measures across hundreds of miles without any modern communication. And they did it thousands of years ago. They had perfectly aligned grid streets, advanced wells, and sophisticated drainage channels that wouldn't be seen again for centuries. All of these physical systems strongly point to a society operating with mind-blowing organization. You want a perfect example of this deep civic organization? Look at Dholavira. Different geographical settings meant they had to adapt, and Dholavira boasts complex water management architecture, including these massive reservoirs. Now, this wasn't just for show. It was absolutely essential for survival. They basically engineered their way around the extreme unpredictability of seasonal monsoon rainfall, proving that human ingenuity in the face of intense climate challenges is certainly nothing new. Section 3. Mysteries of Power. So here is where our investigation hits some incredibly strange missing clues. The crucial point is a striking thematic contrast. In places like Egypt and Mesopotamia, you have enormous pyramids, royal tombs, and massive monuments essentially dedicated to individual egos. But in the Indus Valley, we find standardized civic bricks, advanced drainage, and great baths, but absolutely zero obvious royal palaces. There is no massive monument explicitly dedicated to a single, boasting ruler. It's all about civic utility over royal ego. This stunning absence has led researchers to fiercely debate who was actually running the show. How did a government function so smoothly without leaving behind huge monuments to authority? Was power highly centralized? Was it managed by a council of merchant elites? Were priestly groups in charge? Or was it more of a decentralized network of local authorities? The archaeological evidence we have today simply doesn't give us a definitive answer, which leaves us in the middle of a frantic historical guessing game. And compounding this mystery of their leadership is the Indus script. We have found hundreds of these symbols carved into seals, pottery, and everyday tablets. But to this day, zero translations. It remains a completely undeciphered code, frustrating linguists and archaeologists for literally decades. Because these inscriptions have never been reliably cracked, we're left with a huge historical blind spot. We cannot confidently read the names of their rulers. We can't read their literature or understand their religious texts. And most tragically, we're completely missing their own explanation of who they were. We are forced to piece together their lives entirely from the silent objects they left behind in the dirt. But what those silent objects, like beads, tools, and shells, actually do tell us is that they definitely weren't isolated. They were the center of a bustling global economy spanning all the way to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. Trading beautiful goods like carnelian, lapis lazuli, and metals, this massive commerce was driven by a highly skilled society of merchants, craftspeople, and farmers. Their everyday life was vibrant, entrepreneurial, and deeply connected to the wider ancient world. Section 4, The Great Transformation. Okay, we need to dismantle a common Hollywood myth right off the bat here. This entire civilization didn't just instantly vanish in some dramatic apocalypse. The archaeological evidence firmly points to a much more gradual process of deurbanization. Large-scale urban systems weaken, certain settlements slowly decline, long-distance trade alters, and population patterns shift over generations. It was a complex transition, rather than a sudden, dramatic extinction. But obviously, that still leaves us with a massive puzzle. If they weren't wiped out overnight by a cinematic disaster, what caused these incredible urban systems to fail? Why did the trade start to dry up? Why did people ultimately leave these perfectly planned grid streets? Modern scholarship avoids pointing the finger at just one thing, and instead approaches this almost like an active investigation board, looking at a complex web of suspects. Was it climate change causing severe drought, a catastrophic shift in river systems, weakening monsoons, or perhaps an economic collapse in trade that forced a massive social reorganization? There's no single easy answer, and researchers continue to vigorously debate how all these environmental and economic pressures stacked up against them. And so, returning to those empty streets of Mohenjo-daro, we are left looking at a pretty haunting scene. The perfectly standardized bricks remain, the sophisticated drains remain, the courtyards are still sitting right there, but the urban system, the vibrant society that created and maintained all of it, is gone. Which brings us to the ultimate cliffhanger. The mystery isn't just why the Harappan cities fell silent. The deeper, much more fascinating question is where the people migrated to, and whether the civilization truly disappeared at all, or if it just evolved into something entirely new. In part 2 of this explainer, we'll follow the evidence beyond the abandoned cities to understand one of the greatest transformations of the ancient world. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to the explainer. Okay, I want you to literally picture this scene in your head. The sun is setting over the silent, ancient brick ruins of Mohenjo-daro. Now, in our previous explainer, we completely marveled at the sheer scale and the absolute brilliance of the society at its peak. But today we're facing an entirely different kind of challenge. We are essentially opening an archaeological cold case. We're standing in the empty streets of what used to be a bustling, highly advanced metropolis, and we have to figure out, where did everyone go? So we're going to look really closely at the evidence, step by step, to try and understand the incredible transformation of Harappan urban society. Okay, let's dive into this. For a really long time, the popular narrative surrounding the Indus Valley was just this sudden vanishing act. You know, an ancient apocalypse, where an entire advanced civilization just evaporated into dust. But we really have to ask ourselves, does that dramatic, Hollywood-style narrative actually hold up to the evidence? Did an entire civilization simply disappear? I mean, sure, the streets are empty today, but does a whole population just vanish overnight? No way. The truth actually forces us to completely shift our mental model. The archaeological record doesn't show us a sudden, catastrophic extinction event. Not at all. Instead, it shows us a major structural transformation over a really long period of time. So the grand cities of the Indus Valley were absolutely changing. They were breaking down and emptying out, but the actual people who built them, they weren't just disappearing into thin air. Let's trace the unraveling of these great cities during what archaeologists call the late Harappan period. The very fabric of urban life just started to fray. We start seeing a noticeable decline in the maintenance of their large-scale urban infrastructure. And those incredibly widespread standardized systems that really define them, the uniform weights, the specific measures, the ubiquitous pottery styles, they just started to fade away. long-distance trade networks fundamentally shifted, and specialized craft production completely altered its patterns. Basically, urban life, which had literally been the shining hallmark of their entire culture, just became much less dominant. So the crucial point here is understanding this concept of deurbanization. When we casually talk about the collapse of the Indus Valley, that word can be incredibly misleading, right? Because it makes us imagine mass casualties. But deurbanization simply means the population transitioned away from living in those massive, dominant urban centers. They dispersed instead into smaller, way more localized settlements and communities. Leaving a massive city absolutely does not mean an entire population died out. It just means they restructured how they lived. But, of course, that brings up a really obvious mystery. If the people survived, what drove them out of the great cities in the first place? What on earth made that incredible, advanced urban landscape so difficult to sustain that they eventually just packed up and left? Well, to figure that out, we have to act like environmental detectives. Let's look at our primary environmental suspects. The massive agricultural surplus needed to feed these giant ancient cities depended heavily on very predictable water availability. And modern research actually suggests there were some significant changes in the South Asian monsoon patterns during this exact period of Harappan transformation. Reduced rainfall would directly compromise agriculture and food production, which in turn severely threatens the stability of a settlement. So climate change is a major, highly likely piece of the puzzle here, though to be fair, it isn't necessarily the entire explanation. This environmental pressure really compounds when we factor in the rivers. I mean, water was the absolute lifeblood of the Harappans. But rivers in the Indus region can naturally change their courses over long periods, creating this complex, constantly shifting hydrology, especially within the Ghaggar-Hakra river system. Now, while the ancient hydrology of this specific system is incredibly complicated and is still the subject of really intense, ongoing research, and by the way, we're carefully avoiding definitively labeling it the mythical Saraswati River here, we do know for a fact that shifting river channels could dramatically alter the landscape. It literally made once thriving settlements completely unviable. To truly understand how the Harappans reacted to these immense environmental pressures, just look at Dholavira's survival strategy. It's fascinating. Step 1, they built these incredibly sophisticated, massive reservoirs. Step 2, they meticulously collected seasonal water. Step 3, they desperately tried to adapt to their changing regional environment. A society that invests this heavily in large-scale water management is a society actively responding to a highly variable and challenging environment. It's brilliant evidence of adaptation, even though Dholavira, too, eventually declined as the regional conditions kept worsening. And this brilliantly illustrates the economic side of the crisis, what we can basically call the trade domino effect. See, the Harappans were part of this massive international trading network, connected all the way to Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf. But then, first, that long-distance exchange begins to weaken. Second, because the international market is suddenly drying up, specialized urban craft production slows down. And third, the interconnected cities just become economically unsustainable. The merchants, the transport systems, the craftsmen, they all relied on each other. So when international trade faltered, it caused this giant chain reaction that literally broke the urban economy. Now, we absolutely must address an older, very famous theory you might have heard. This idea that a violent, large-scale invasion by Indo-Aryan groups destroyed the Indus cities. Modern archaeology actually rejects this completely as a simple explanation. Why? Well, because there's a total lack of archaeological evidence for a single dramatic destruction event or a mass invasion. The actual history of Indo-Aryan language and migration into South Asia is a reality of complex, gradual migration, decentralization, and cultural adaptation. It definitely wasn't some sudden, violent collapse. Beyond those grand structural shifts in climate and trade, everyday communities were facing localized pressures too. People were constantly having to relocate just to find more reliable agricultural conditions, kind of shifting depending on whether their specific region relied on seasonal rainfall or river systems. And on top of that, large, dense urban centers are notorious breeding grounds for disease. While researchers have investigated health and nutrition, and honestly, no specific grand epidemic is proven to have caused the decline, everyday public health challenges in a dense city were highly likely another significant pressure pushing people towards smaller, less crowded settlements. So if we bring all of our suspects together, what's the final verdict here? Well, it was a really complex web of interacting processes. You have environmental change, shifting rivers, monsoon variability, agricultural pressures, economic restructuring, and social transformation, all just layered on top of each other. And the exact combination of these factors probably differed entirely from region to region. So there wasn't a single uniform collapse event that was experienced identically everywhere. It was very much a multi-factor decline. Which actually brings us to one of the most frustrating barriers for historians. What could their undeciphered script reveal? I mean, if we could suddenly read their inscriptions, the silence of the ruins would finally be broken. We might actually know their names, their religious beliefs, their administrative records, or even how their politics were organized. But until that script is reliably deciphered, we're forced to rely purely on the physical archaeology to try and understand them. But thankfully, that physical archaeology allows us to completely reframe the narrative. The people survived. The civilization simply changed its form. That massive interconnected urban system transformed into a much more decentralized cultural landscape. The populations dispersed, new regional cultures emerged, and Harappan traditions actually continued, just in totally altered forms. I want you to just imagine those ancient residents leaving Mohenjo-daro at sunset. Picture them carrying their possessions, their tools, their pottery, seeds, and all their memories, moving eastward and southward toward new communities. It leaves us with this really powerful thought. The cities disappeared, but the people did not. They adapted, moved, rebuilt, and carried parts of their culture into the future. Thousands of years later, their bricks still stand, their symbols still challenge us, and their story remains unfinished. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Indus Valley Civilization is not why its cities fell silent, but how much of its world survived beyond those silent streets. Until the Indus script can finally speak, the ruins will continue to ask the questions, and we will continue searching for the answers. This has been The Explainer. Until next time, keep questioning history.